So in the last lecture, I introduced you to the concept of sound symbolism, the way that speech sounds can convey properties of the things that they describe, and how many brands already seem to be using, intuitively or deliberately, these sort of insights from psycholinguistics to help to convey to consumers the properties of the things that they wish the consumers to buy or use or consume. For me, I've taken that sort of phenomenon, which is specifically about speech sounds and how they're connected to sizes, small or large, shape, angular or round. And I've extended it to think about other surprising connections between the senses that not only involve speech sounds, but also how colours are connected to smells and to tastes, how shapes are connected to tastes and flavours. Taking the very same shapes to begin with in our work that we started doing in 2006, the bouba and kiki shape that we came across last time, the angular star-like shape on the one hand and the rounded cloud on the other. Remember, kiki is the angular one, bouba is the round one. And we give people a scale with bouba and kiki at either end, and then we give them or ask them to imagine the taste of milk chocolate and to put a mark somewhere on that line between bouba at one end and kiki at the other. Sounds like a silly question, but we have our subjects just taste the milk chocolate, imagine the taste of chocolate if you don't have any to hand, and how would you describe your experience? Then do the same thing for a piece of dark chocolate, high cocoa content. Again, where would you mark on the line between bouba at one extreme and kiki at the other? Now don't worry, there's no right or wrong answers here because tastes do not literally have shapes attached. And yet from many studies that we've been conducting over the last 10 or 15 years, it turns out there's a consensual answer that the majority of people will agree that milk chocolate should be closer to the rounder bouba end of the scale, whereas bitter dark chocolate should be more angular instead. It just feels right that that's the way things go. And if we try that with 9 or 10 Nestle marketing executives, I can guarantee that 9 out of 10 will pick the milk chocolate as rounder than the dark chocolate. How could we use that insight? Well, one of the ways we've been thinking about using it was to say that if you are a company who's trying to make a product that tastes sweeter or tastes just as sweet as always, but you're trying to reduce the sugar, then perhaps you should make your products rounder, because that will set an expectation of sweeter, like in a sweet milk chocolate, whereas angular shapes seem to be associated with bitter tastes instead. We suggested that in 2011, and in 2013, there was kind of a natural experiment in the real world with Cadbury's Dairy Milk, one of England's favourite chocolate bars, iconic chocolate bars, comes in a rectangular shape. And in 2013, they came out with a modification to their product where they shaved off about 3.9 grams and made the pieces, each piece, a little bit rounder. So it's no longer an angular shape. And consumers complained, as they always do when their favourite brands are changed, saying, what have you done to our favourite Cadbury's Dairy Milk? It tastes sweeter and it tastes creamier, was the complaint, according to those writing in and calling the hotline. And then we have Mondelez International, who makes or owns Cadbury's these days, coming back and saying, no, we didn't change the formula of the chocolate at all. All we did is change the shape. This sort of makes no sense from a physical level, and yet in terms of these surprising connections between the senses, it was what we predicted would happen, that if you make something rounder, it will set expectations of sweeter. And if you expect things to be sweeter, then very often they do taste sweeter and or creamier to you. So maybe, for those brands out there who want to reduce the sugar content to make a little bit less unhealthy product, it may be the way to go to increase roundness. Very often they won't tell the consumer that that is what they're doing, but look at something like Rose's chocolates and many others have also been rounding off their iconic confectionery forms in order, I think, to convey sweetness. There's again this almost synesthetic cross-modal correspondence, a surprising link between shapes and tastes. Now we can do the very same thing with carbonation as well. So if I ask you to imagine the taste of still or sparkling water, and then say where on the bouba to kiki scale would you put still water, where would you mark the scale for sparkling water, then most people will put the sparkling water as more towards the angular end of the scale. We've tested this in populations from around the world, and the majority agree that carbonated is angular. The reason for that is revealed when you go to a supermarket and then look at carbonated and still water brands, one of the most famous of which is San Pellegrino, which has a bright red star in the front of the label, on the front of the bottle. It has a red star on the top of the bottle. It has 3 or 4 more angular red stars elsewhere on the larger bottles. No one ever tells you what they're doing there. There's no purpose for them. And yet, since the brand was created in the 1890s and first came onto the shelf, it always had an angular star, whereas Aqcua Panna, the still water version from the same company, has no angularity on it. So in the 1890s, did they know about these surprising, almost synesthetic connections between the senses? I guess not. But maybe it's an intuitive designer who came up with that label and just felt that sparkling water deserved an angular shape. And you can see many brands there in the water aisle who are sort of communicating, I think, almost subliminally through the use of shape to convey taste or carbonation. And if we put the two findings together then of carbonation being angular and also bitterness from dark chocolate being angular, then if you think of a bitter, angular drink, a bitter carbonated drink, that gets you to lager and beer. And so one might expect that there too, there should be an over-representation of angular shapes in the logos and labels of beer brands. And from what I can see, that certainly seems to be the case. From the very first trademarked label from Bass & Co in the 1820s, an angular red triangle, through Heineken, through Stella Artois, Mahou, Newcastle Brown Ale, Estrella Damm, even called Star, the name of a beer, all have an angular star on the front, very often red. And I think this is communicating almost synesthetically with us consumers. Once it's pointed out to you, and next time you go to the supermarket, you can sort of see this in action. But until you think about it, it is sort of there in the background, subliminal. I mean, why did we never think what the red star was doing on the front of the San Pellegrino bottle? It's kind of bizarre when you think about it. And yet I think this is a really interesting area where shapes can be used to convey tastes. Angular, as I say, for bitter, round for sweet. So if you're designing a soft drink, maybe a Coca-Cola or something like that, perhaps it's no coincidence that their typeface that they use to write Coca-Cola is a very curvy script. I think that all fits in with the idea of conveying a sweet taste, combined with the white and the red as two colours that convey sweetness. And without saying a word, you can get your message across and set up the right expectations for the consumer. If it's something sour instead you're trying to sell, then it turns out sour is also angular, but sour is also asymmetric. So you might want to italicize typeface instead. And again, next time you go to the supermarket or store, just look at the range of shapes and typefaces and windows in product packaging and think why they are that shape and what they may be conveying to you, the consumer, and whether you think you're being influenced, biased by the shape symbolism in the marketplace. This then is just a little glimpse into the world of synaesthetic marketing, as it's called, when brands and designers and agencies and advertisers try and communicate with you, the consumer, without words, using colours, shapes, forms, textures, and as we'll see a little later, even using sounds as well to add a little bit of sonic seasoning to the taste of food. So just to wrap up, what have we seen in this lecture? I think these cross-modal correspondences between sensory features, between shapes and tastes are strong. They're kind of ubiquitous in populations. They could just be kind of an interesting laboratory phenomenon, but by analysing what's going on in the marketplace, I think we can see these correspondences do play out in the marketplace. They're a form of communication with the consumer that is almost subliminal, and the better we understand what's going on, the better I, as a consumer psychologist, can then help companies and brands to communicate better and maybe in a more intriguing way with their consumers. And so from there, we'll move on in the next lecture to look at what I think is a fascinating topic of sonic seasoning.